This podcast is brought to you by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. By the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve. And by Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Bob Smietana is an award-winning religion reporter and editor who has spent 2 decades producing breaking news, data journalism, investigative reporting, profiles, and features for magazines, newspapers, trade publications, and websites. We'll discuss his new book, Reorganized Religion, The Reshaping of the American Church and Why It Matters.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we're glad we've intersected with you today on this 7th season of the Vicar's Crossing and our 3rd episode of our new season. And I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church here in London, Ontario.
Kevin George over here with my buddy Rob. I'm at St. Aidan's Anglican Church in Oxford Street West, and this is the first time on season 3 that we have
Season
the one
3.
and only season 7, the 3rd episode of season 7. This is the first chance we get to see producer Ian.
Hello, I'm Ian. I'm a musician and content creator. Welcome to the podcast.
Glad to have you back,
baby.
Ian.
Hello.
All right.
Finally got a chance to be on one of these.
Now it feels like we're whole again, guys.
Yeah.
Rob, what do you think? Like, has he been loafing around in a silk robe somewhere? Like,
I don't know. I've been listening to the police scanners to hear if anything wrong's happening.
I've heard
but I
nothing.
think he's
I've heard
okay.
nothing. Okay.
I've evaded the police for so long, and
Okay.
I'll keep doing it.
All right.
Something we said, Ian.
Must have been something we said. I don't know what was going on. All right.
No, glad Ian's back with us, and glad to welcome a special guest today on the Vicar's Crossing podcast. Today we're excited to welcome Bob Smietana. Bob Smietana is a veteran religious writer and national reporter for Religion News Service, and he's just got a new book out, which is called Reorganized Religion: The Reshaping of the American Church and Why It Matters. So it's
You see what he did there?
Conversation to have today.
You see
What's
what
that?
he did there, right? So, like, people talk about organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got that reorganized religion.
Reorganizing religion, right?
Yeah,
And reshaping
reorganized
it.
religion. I like that.
And why it matters, because, well, we're biased, but we think it
Yep,
does matter.
we think it does matter.
that things get reorganized and get moving again. So
Yep, lots to talk about. What I like about this book, Rob, is the dude is a beat writer. Like, he's been writing. He's been on the God beat for over 30 years. He's not a theologian. He's not,
Mhm.
This is a reporter, a journalist.
Right.
But it's a great book. In the meantime, especially this week, this episode is dropping on the week of our national holiday of National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We want to acknowledge that here on the Vicar's Crossing, we record this podcast on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoak, and Attawandaron peoples, who are on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. Now, these lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. And our prayer and our wish is to be able to walk with our siblings in the Indigenous communities towards wholeness and reconciliation for all people.
very much so. Thank you. And we want to also take a moment to thank our sponsors here in the Vicar's Crossing. We've got 3 wonderful sponsors that help us keep this thing going every week. First, thank you and hello to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And a big shout out to Dave Mullen and everyone at A. Miller George today.
Great guy over there, that Dave Mullen. And our new sponsor in this season 7 is the Diocese of Huron, a place Rob and I know well, as our parishes are located right within the auspices of the Grand Diocese of Huron. The Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, from Grand Bend to Port Rowan, come together to worship and serve. And our gratitude and thanks go out to the Right Reverend Todd Townsend, Bishop of the Diocese of Huron, for arranging that sponsorship for us.
And last but certainly not least, we want to say a big thank you to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. And Trisha Lister was a wonderful human being over there who hooked us up with that. So thank you to Molly Maid and all of their wonderful people.
I saw one of the cars drive by me yesterday. We were next to each other at a stoplight. And I'm like waving, but they have no idea, of course.
Did you scream out the window, "Hi, Trisha"?
I should have, but I don't. I've never met Trisha. I don't know what she looks like. It could have been her other staff, and I thought, no, that's too creepy. So anyway, if that was you, Trisha, on the corner of Warncliffe and Commissioners yesterday, that was me. That was me.
Well, Rob, I think we should play our segment that we played last season.
Yes, I agree, Kevin. We should do that once again because it's one of our favorites. So without further ado,
drum roll,
Kevin.
please.
Kevin, who in the world did we book this week?
Well, I'm ever glad you asked. I booked this week for next week, Karen Swallow Pryor. Now, Karen Swallow Pryor, PhD, is a research professor of English and Christianity and Culture at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And she has a great book called Booked Literature in the Soul of Me. She has a great new book out about C.S. Lewis. And one of her most recent books is called On Reading Well. And they've kindly sent along books for us, Rob, which I'll drop off to you so we can be ready. So next week, we look forward to welcoming Karen Swallow Pryor.
Looking forward to that. Today, we're going to talk about reorganized religion, the reshaping of the church, and why it matters. And there's lots to it. So let's bring in the author of that book, Bob Smietana, and talk more in the Vickers Crossing podcast.
All right.
And Bob Smietana is joining us now in the Vickers Crossing podcast, author of Reorganized Religion, the Reshaping of the American Church, Why It Matters. Bob, welcome aboard. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you all?
We're doing really well. And you're in Boston, right?
Actually, I'm just outside of Chicago. I grew up outside just south of Boston.
Okay.
And then I lived in Chicago, then went to Nashville for about 14 years, and now I'm back here.
Yeah,
great.
He's been everywhere, this guy. He's like Hank Williams. He's been everywhere.
I've been everywhere.
Man.
And I live in a town called Woodstock, Illinois, where they filmed Groundhog Day.
Oh, no way.
Nice.
That's
Bill Murray.
Yeah. So have you seen Groundhog Day in that big square?
Yeah.
That's where I walk by every day on my lunchtime walk.
Awesome.
Yeah, fantastic.
Wonderful.
There you go. Well, we're glad you're with us. I got to say to you, I really love the book. I love the stuff you write all the time on Religion News Service. It's a great thrill to have you on here, actually, and I appreciate you picking up. I send these messages sometimes, and people are like, "Who are you freaks from Canada? We don't want anything to do with you." But Bob was like right away, "Yeah, I'll do that. Sure, yeah." So,
it'll be fun. I love Canadians.
Yeah, well, what's not to love, really, except our self-righteousness and all the rest of it. But anyway. Sorry about your Red Sox this year, but we're gonna go get on the Jays bandwagon and see how that goes.
Yes, well, let's go on them because it's a bad year for the Red Sox.
Yeah.
They decided that having players who actually can play is and who don't have just good statistics or good analytics.
Yeah,
is the way to go, and that didn't go so well.
Right, anything but the Yankees, right? So
yes.
All right. Listen, before we get into the book, because we really do want to talk about that, I thought at first, though, we'd jump in and sort of talk about something which is really happening as we speak in the United States. Last week, there was an article of yours in Religion News Service. I'll get it out in a minute, about migrants, Venezuelans, 50 people put on a plane by Governor DeSantis, flown to Martha's Vineyard with what, to us up in the attic here, looking down in the basement, looks like a bit of a stunt. But what was really touching to me in your article was just how this church, which was there, this Episcopalian church, and I guess it sort of picks up on some of what you're writing in the book, actually, about how congregations are ready and equipped to do some of these things, but how they react in a crisis or when something shows up on their doorstep. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about this current situation where immigrants seem to be being used as pawns or political theater, I guess. I was quite impressed with the Episcopalian vicar of St. Andrews. I think it was a guy called Chip. Is that what his name
Chip.
is? Chip.
Father Chip.
I love anybody being called Chip. I'm a big fan of Chip. So Chip, small, faithful church that steps up immediately to provide assistance and shelter. You quoted him as saying, love is still the answer, and faith leaders can choose to help the nation's divides rather than fueling them. It's becoming much clearer to me these days, says Chip, that there's a role for responsible people of faith. We need to step up and fill this void in a responsible way, caring for everyone, no matter what they say or think. Can you say more about this whole crisis around immigration,
Sure.
what you're seeing as a
Well,
reporter? And
yeah, there's been an ongoing crisis here in the U.S. over the border, and it's been goes back to the George W. Bush days when there was hope to have immigration reform, and it didn't go anywhere. And it's been kind of bouncing back and forth ever since. And you know, we haven't had a lot of great solutions. We had the solutions of make everybody stay in Mexico, and we had the solution of lock everyone up, comes across the border, separate families. That's not worked. Then for asylum seekers, especially right now, they can, if they come to the U.S., they can ask for asylum. They get, and then they get sent on, you know, so they get a court date. They're able to travel if they have family and go to there. And that's been interrupted because I think some of the states it's complicated. The states in the border have a lot of folks crossing,
yes,
and we have kind of chaos in that we don't have a really great system for having people come and say, I need asylum, say from Venezuela, which is, you know, there are all kinds of refugees from Venezuela where the economy has really tanked and people are really suffering. And there has been some repression of people. So, you know, we have a refugee system that got shut down under the former president. We have an asylum system that says you can come to the U.S. and ask for asylum, but we don't have a great system for adjudicating those claims. So everyone knows there's a problem, and we in the U.S. at least, I don't know how you're up in Canada, but you in the U.S. are not good at solving problems. We're good at. So I think everybody would like to solve the problem. And the theater of this is you send them to Martha's Vineyard, and Martha's Vineyard is kind of two places. I grew up on the East Coast, and so we went to Martha's Vineyard, you know, as high school students. Our church got a bus and a bunch of bikes, and we took our bikes over on the ferry, and we rode around, and we got some ice cream, and we had a great time. And then there's also the Kennedy Obama kind of part of the island. So I think the impression for people from out of state is this is a wealthy enclave of the rich and famous, and that's only part of the story. The full-time residents, when all the tourists are gone, still know how to take care of each other. So I think Father Chip was worried about being used as a pawn in this drama the same way people were. So they basically were like, oh, people show up. This is where organized religion is really good, right? People show up. We already have they have a whole, because they have unhoused people on the island. They have a shelter there. They just renovated their parish house to have a kitchen, and laundry and shower. So they're all set. And the Unitarians and the Jewish congregation, these folks all work together. So they hear about it and say, okay, we have a place for people to stay. And we have a place where people send donations. We have a place where if attorneys want to contact them about their immigration status, they provided a space for doing all that. And they really were not, they would like the government to solve the problem. And I think that's part of his question. And I think his point was, you know, here's our part of this. You know, we would like you to do this, but we don't want to play this game because these are people. And we see them first as people, not as kind of political pawns.
I thought it was fascinating because I think as an observer from out of the country and looking out of the course, I bought into that notion of Martha's Vineyard too, about being, you know, the Kennedys and the Obamas and the, you know, the Clintons and so on, like people with their money. And so when I was reading about this Episcopalian church, which is something Rob and I can identify with, that works with the unhoused all winter, on Martha's Vineyard, it was like, oh, well, this is not what we think at all. And I sort of chuckled and I thought, well, I don't know if Ron DeSantis sort of thought they were just all going to show up outside of a ritzy place and there'd be nowhere for them to go. But in steps this little church and goes, oh no, we got you.
We got you. Yeah. And they did an orderly process. Stay here. We'll figure out what to do, get you some loans. And then people left because, if you're an asylum seeker, you get legal entry in the country, and then you often travel to a place where you have resources. So they didn't have any family on Martha's Vineyard. If they wanted to stay, they could have, but and it's a geographically isolated place. So there was, the drama is, they show up at Martha's Vineyard and they get deported right away. When they just took the ferry over to somewhere else where they could move on to where they want to go. But it's easier to do that. I can see the political drama of it. But the church people were like, okay, we know it is because in the winter they're isolated from people. They're an isolated community. So in an isolated community, what do? You take care of each other. It reminds me of the story a little bit. It's a much smaller scale of the town. There's a book, The Day the World Came to Gander.
Gander.
It reminds me a little bit of Gander.
Well, I'm from Newfoundland.
Right. So same thing, a little bit isolated. We know what to do when people need help. And so
all the churches pitched in. All of a sudden, a town of 8,000 swelled by another 6, and it was like, okay, no big deal.
Right. So it was a great. It's a nice for them. I think it's a lovely. I was like, this is the perfect story of why organized religion matters, what churches can do, and what was really nice to see was like someone followed Chip. What was really interesting too is the Unitarians folks. I wish I might write about this too, but before. When I talked to the Unitarian pastor there, she was doing a thing this weekend called Baseball, Barbecue, and Belonging.
Oh yeah.
It's part of a whole series of like, how do people belong and how do they stick together? Because one of the things we have, especially now, right? So what we have, all the incentives are to be transactional in your relationships. Both in church and the community. So she was thinking in our churches, that there's transactional, sometimes you think transactional of, we have this community, if you believe everything we say, you get to stay. If you don't, you have to leave. But there's a consumer transactionalism. I belong to you as long as you agree with me.
That's where you do
give
my
me
thing.
what I want.
Exactly.
Do my thing. And when you don't, I leave too. So we don't
or we make you leave.
We make you leave, but there's none of the soft skills. People have lots of soft skills of, I have to work things out. And one of the things that's happened in the U.S. congregations, I don't know if it's happened where you folks are, is this move to staff-driven churches, elder-driven models, where which is efficient, but because the congregation is almost seen as too inefficient to influence people to get things done. And so if you have to be in the congregational meeting and you have to sort out, what do you do about your minister? What do you do about their community? What do you do about the color of the carpet? What do we do? Do we have pews? Do we not have pews? You have to sit with those people and stay with them and talk through them and learn how to influence them. And if you're the leader, you have to influence people, which would actually prepare you better for life in the US now, where people don't believe in institutional leaders anymore. You have influence and you have to convince people. It's a lot harder work.
And we're going to come to some of that too. So you're moving us into the book quite well. You say at the outset that this book is about organized religion, and I love the title, Reorganized Religion. Why? But yours, it's about organized religion, why it matters, why it is in trouble, and why the decline of organized religion, in particular Christian churches in the United States, why that decline will affect all of us, no matter who we are or what we believe. You will also say it's a book about why organized religion can and should be saved, and what that might cost is a whole other question that you address as well. Can you say more about why write this book and why now especially?
So a couple things. So one of it was I've been covering religion since 1999, so 23 years, and really actually after 2007 I moved to Tennessee to start covering religion in Nashville, and I really got a better glimpse of the whole faith-based disaster relief services. So in the US, if there's a disaster, there's all kinds of volunteers that show up, but a large part of the volunteers and the organizations that are trained to respond to disaster are religious. The Mennonites are there. The Mennonites know how to rebuild things. The Methodists, the Baptists, the Mormons, everybody shows up. The atheists, everybody shows up, and they know how to respond. And so I had been covering another, I don't remember. I wish I remember which hurricane it was, but it's a disaster. talking to faith leaders, what are you doing here? And they're extraordinarily organized. And then I come back to my desk, I see this email, the rise of the nuns increases, decline of organized religion.
Yeah.
And I realized, having been at a number of disaster locations, that almost everybody goes there who has time to volunteer is older.
Mhm.
And they're mostly white in the US. But they're older church people, and they're not being replaced. There's no people in the pipeline. And as the organized religion goes down, or the number of those older Christian folks die off, there's no one to take their place. So what's going to happen when you have a disaster and there's no Baptists or Mennonites or Lutherans or Methodists to show up to help out? That's a problem. And you won't notice it till you're like, wait, where are they? And it's not something, and they've spent years being organized. So if there's going to be a tornado, or if not a tornado, it's going to be a hurricane, they are moving food and supplies and everything, pre-positioning them. This takes a lot of, these are very sophisticated responses. This is not just, and that's part of it, because they're organized and they thought through, how do we be faithful in the world? Well, we should help our neighbors when something goes wrong. Well, how do we do that? We have to be organized. We have to have trucks, and we have to have communications and training. It's a really, so that made me think about every part of our communities, the way organized religion plays a role. And the one ways I think about it is this way. So I told you, we moved to Woodstock, Illinois, small town outside of Chicago. We have a great house. It's just big enough for our kids to visit, and for our we have a grandbaby on the way. So it'll be great for the grandkids, but it's small enough not to have everybody stay forever, right? But the kitchen is too small, and I would love to make the kitchen bigger. And it'd be easy to do if we blow out the wall between the kitchen and the living room. But if we blow out that wall, the roof falls in because it's a bearing wall.
Right.
And I think there's part of that. We are seeing the decline of organized religion in the US. Sometimes it's called the end of white Christian America.
Yes.
Robert Jones has
Robert P. Jones. Yeah.
Robert P. Jones. But what happens when you have that ending and you don't put something in place? So we could have something in place to replace what faith groups do. We just haven't thought about that. So that was part of it too. And then I think organized religion gets a bad rap among church leaders and people. Yeah. There's this kind of idea that, well, if there's decline, I don't know if you have this in Canada. In the US, is like, if you have decline, it's because the fake Christians left.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? The fake people. We're just going to have the real ones. And I'm like, there'll be 5 of you and you won't have any money, right? It's not like the people who are horrific. It's not like all these institutions and all this work gets done by people who are perfectly the most devoted, saintly people. It's always been people who are, some people have been cultural and some people have been less part of it, but they've still been part of the community. And to say that you're just going to get rid of everybody is kind of short-sighted, in my opinion. And I'm a reporter, I'm not supposed to give my opinion, but it's
we want your opinion.
But logistically, you can say, wait, you just gonna, and who gets to decide who the real folks? But who's going to do this work?
Right. And in section 1 of the book, Bob, you mentioned Robert P. Jones, and you do kind of a bigger dive on demographic shifts, because that's such a big part of this, that and America is different than it was, right? The old America is the white and Christian. The new America is diverse, pluralistic. One of the fastest growing religious groups are the nuns.
Yes,
the NONES.
Yes,
who claim no identity. And it's also true that America's grandparents go to church, but their grandchildren do not. And the grandparents are the ones keeping the churches alive. So I wanted to just share a quote from the book with our listeners. You write that it is no longer viable to build a sustainable religion in the United States with a supply chain of primarily white Christians. The one thing that almost all declining Christian denominations, like the Episcopal Church and the Southern Baptist Convention, have in common is their membership is predominantly white. And one of the great contradictions in American religious life is that white evangelicals, many of whom are concerned about the future of the Christian church in the States, are one of the most anti-immigrant demographic and political groups in the country. And this is despite the fact that one of the factors that keeps American Christianity strong is the stream of new immigrants who are predominantly Christian. Can you say more about how these shifting demographics are really game changers? Because it's a big deal.
It really is a game changer. So it's interesting. If you were in the US, in the 50s or 60s or 70s, you would have heard this kind of idea that conservative churches grow, liberal churches shrink. That's the kind of mantra. And what it turns out is that all churches shrink because the country has changed. So when I was born in 1965, 85% of the country is white. Almost everyone is Christian. And the major debate is which Christians are going to be in charge, Protestants or Catholics. That's the kind of major religion story of the day. As you said, now I'm about to have a grandbaby, or as I said, I'm about to have a grandbaby. When she's born, half the kids in America are not going to be white.
Right.
So she'll be the most diverse population in American history. The nuns are the fascinating. You may have as many as 40 to 50% of Americans be nuns by the year 2070.
Right.
So this is so almost every denomination, major faith-based organization in the U.S. was built for this world, which is mostly white Christians who thought going to church was a good thing, and bringing your kids to church and religion had a privileged place. They're built for that world, and so you were competing over which Christians are the best, right? Which church? So if I would say you're going to come to church, so my church is the best, and if you're nicer, you'd say my church is the best for you, right? This is the best match for you. If you're a little more crass, you say this is the best church. We're right, but the presumption was people were going to come seeking spirituality from you, and you were competing for market share. Now, those folks, their kids don't go to church. They have fewer kids, and their kids don't stay in church. And so, and those old churches look like the America because it was mostly white.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
it is not anymore. So if you want to look like what your community looks like, you're going to be different. And the problem in America is we have this, as we become more diverse, we've also become more separated in that we have sorted ourselves. We have the big sort here. I don't know if you have that in Canada, but the big sort is you sort into groups of people who look like you, think like you, vote the same way you do, have the same consumer choices. And the way to get anything done in that kind of environment is to tell people which group you don't like.
Right.
Because you motivate people to say, so you might believe, so that's our problem with immigration. People want to fix immigration. The Democrats don't trust the Republicans. The Republicans don't trust the Democrats. The way to get elected is to tell people why the other party is bad. So you're not moving things forward. And actually this happens in churches. I don't know, again, about 1 in 4 churches, I'm throwing a lot of data, but
that's all right.
We have 1 in 4 churches in the U.S. are considered multi-ethnic, which said more than 20% of the congregation is of a different ethnicity than the majority.
Yeah.
So we have this growing up, but then we have conflict because of that, because people bring their whole selves and they disagree about all these other things. And they don't have the cross-cutting ability to say, oh, wait, we're together here. We're bound together in this congregation. But what is the Christian way to vote, or well, I don't know, because these Christians say this and those Christians say that, and those Christians say this. So we have to work on this together. But it goes, all the incentives go the other way.
I thought one of the most powerful examples in the book of that shift is the Crystal Cathedral. You know, Robert Schuller's, you know, and now it actually is a cathedral in the Roman Catholic Church, which has multi-ethnic masses in several languages, right?
Yeah. And we saw the same thing in a church in Nashville called Two Rivers Church. Same church, big, well-established, kind of God. So in the U.S. we had what was it called? It was a Judgment Sunday. It was a Sunday to get judges approved, because under one or other Bush, people were not getting, the Senate and Bush were at odds. They're not approving judges, federal judges. So they're going to have Judgment Sunday. We're going to talk about why.
I thought that was a theological thing when you said it. I was going to say, I want to know about Judgment Sunday. What Sunday do I stay away from church? I'm not freaking going to church on
they host a big event at this big church called Two Rivers. Very prestigious, very powerful church. They have a lot of internal arguments. They eventually fall apart. Now it's also a big ministry place with a giant Hispanic congregation. And no one would have thought that. They built this big, tiny place, but the world that it was built for no longer exists. They couldn't adapt to this new world.
So to pick up maybe a little bit on the thread that we talked about at the beginning with the migrant situation, quoting Ryan Burge about the way changing religious landscape is affecting religious charities. You offer this, that the average person doesn't realize all the things that churches do to make society less awful.
Less awful. I love that.
Yeah. It is one of those things where you don't know what you had until it's gone. And in your own words, you have said, I've seen religion comfort people who are afflicted, inspire incredible acts of generosity, and give meaning and purpose to life in millions of people. The truth is that churches and other religious institutions are both human and spiritual communities. Religion is only as good as the people who practice it, and the decisions those people make day after day will determine whether these institutions are harmful or helpful. Faith harms and heals. It pulls us apart and binds us together. It builds cathedrals and burns down cities. It gives life and brings death. Asking if religion is good is like asking if music is good, or food, or politics, or baseball, or books. Religion is human and it matters. And you write very compellingly about the community of saints, and you offer a very personal accounts of just how critically important surrogate faith can be. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little more about just why religion matters, and what if we and if we lose it, we take away a lot. It's like that load-bearing wall, right? That you spoke of in our society would be in difficult space for sure if we lost it.
Yeah. So I you start writing a book and you're trying to convince people that they should care about organized religion. And then I have to think, and I've done this, I covered it for a long time. So I had to think, well, why do I care about this? And I care about it because it has really made a difference in our lives. One of the so there's this famous parable in the Bible about the paralytic man who gets lowered down from the roof. There's a bunch of people in the house. Jesus teaching, they can't get in. Somebody busts the roof. Their friends break the roof open, lower him down, which I would be great.
Yeah.
It's almost a warning. Don't invite Jesus to your house because someone will break your roof.
Yeah, that's
Someone
right.
will bust the roof and get in there.
New roof.
But this college professor and pastor named Arvin Adele, I used to early in my career, I was an editor for a small denominational magazine. He wrote this essay about that parable and this idea of surrogate faith. That really what happened there is this person couldn't walk on their own, and so they need someone to carry them through till they could. And he talked about a friend of his who was a minister who had trouble, I think some mental illness trouble and other issues that he couldn't go on. And his congregation, rather than getting rid of him, said, okay, we'll carry you for a while.
Yeah.
And I think many people in churches or other faith groups have experienced that, where you've been carried along, where you just can't make it, where it's been grief or sickness or other struggles. And that's the kind of communion of saints parts of it. And we have experienced it in our lives when our marriage was in trouble early on. When it's funny, our daughter is having a baby because we were told we would never have any kids. And I have a letter from our doctor. We'll never have any kids.
No kids for you.
No kids for you. And we go to, and our friend at the small church prayed for us. The pastor said, I'm going to pray for you. We're going to bring you up and we're going to pray for you. And I told him, his name was Leaf Fuji. I told him, Leaf, you can do that, but this is not going to work because this is medical. That's not the way these things work. Of course, then we had our youngest, and we ended up having 3 kids. And
bless those who don't see and still believe.
What was lovely about that was that first it was an act of care. And we have this blanket with all these little hearts in it. Everyone has signed, people who are praying for our daughter, which is a really powerful thing. It's a really part of being seen and of communicating the kind of God's love through these people and experiencing it together. And you could track, I don't know about you all, but I could track through my life the way that has happened over and over. And my favorite story, if you will indulge me for talking too long, is a story about my mother. So in America in the 50s and 60s, there was a feud over who's going to be in charge, Catholics, Protestants. 40s, really the 60s. So, we didn't have a Catholic president until 1960. And that was he basically had to say, I'm not going to do what the Pope tells me to do.
I'm not going to sell us out to the papists.
But this was a real so in the 40s, that we have a magazine here called The Christian Century, which is the standard bearer for mainline Christianity. And it's seen as right now as having more progressive views. So in the 40s, they run this story. What if the Catholics win? Tracking growth of the Catholic population, which they thought would become half Americans. And if that happens, then America is over. We're going to become papist, the end of the world. So then in 58, Christianity Today, the major evangelical magazine, runs this article that if America becomes 51% Christian, drawing on the Christian Century work and basically predicting the end of the Protestant church in America. Your kids are going to be forced to go to Catholic church. You have to lose their faith. You won't be able to worship. You Catholic, Protestant institutions and colleges will all be shut down. It's the apocalypse.
Right. There'll be incense everywhere.
It's just everywhere. It's going to be awesome. The Pope will run everything. So in 1958, my mom graduates from nursing school at St. Luke's Hospital. St. Luke's Hospital, I always thought that St. Luke's Hospital is Catholic because it's in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Pretty Catholic place, I would say.
Pretty Catholic place, pretty Catholic place. So, what I found out during researching the book and the way organized religion affect my own life is that it's an Episcopal hospital. So in the 1800s, Episcopalians in the Sunday school class decide, and they're probably well off, decide, oh, wait, we need a hospital. We've got a lot of sick people in our town. We need a hospital there. They start a hospital. Well, if you have a hospital, you need nursing school. They start a nursing school. Now, Episcopalians in the 1800s, not so happy towards Catholics, right? I'm sure they weren't going like, and my mom, my mom's parents were Catholic. They're Catholic immigrants. Yeah. Portugal and from Quebec.
Oh.
My dad's parents.
What's not to love about this man? Really?
My dad's parents were Polish immigrants, right off the boat from Poland. Yeah. So when Christianity Today is writing, which is funny because I used to write a lot for them and worked for them for a while, when they're writing about the end of America as being the Catholic problem, they're talking about my parents and grandparents.
Right.
And yet, my mom, so the other part about this you should know is my grandparents didn't have very much money on my mom's side. Right. Very little money. No money to go to school. My mom shared a bedroom with her and a bed with her grandmother from the day she was born, basically, till the day she went off to college.
Wow.
So what the point about is this: these people, the Episcopalians in the 1800s, start an institution that benefits my mom years and years later, decades later. And at a time when people thought that she was the enemy, they still built this thing.
Yeah.
And we all live downstream from these from the decisions other people have made.
And still supported her.
Yeah, and still supported her on our behalf.
Which by extension, you talk about surrogacy, right? Which by extension then produces you. And we're sitting here talking today, right? Now you've got this grandchild on the way. And
yes. All right. So our life is, I kept thinking, oh boy, all of our lives have been affected by decisions made by people generations before us. And so what happens in the future will largely depend on what decisions that people make now. And do they want to make decisions that are benefit everyone and help people to thrive, or do they want to be look internally and think about their own survival and their own moment by moment victory?
Right.
You make the case in the book that there are many internal and external factors that have fueled the decline of organized religion. And one of those areas that we can see in our own communities has been the interruption of habit of church going because of the pandemic that we've been through. And you make the case that in some cases of this interruption of this habit revealed internal conflicts that were bubbling under the surface of many congregations and were there for a long time, which the pandemic revealed them in a way. Can you share more of what you found in speaking with congregations across the United States who have evolved to whatever system of worship that they have right now, and how that is affecting attendance and volunteer engagement and the life of the communities now, 2 years into this global pandemic?
Oh, sure. So you're right. It really interrupted the habit of church going and volunteering. A lot of larger congregations used to be built on this. You go to one service, in worship, you serve in another, you volunteer at a second one. And almost every congregation needs a ton of volunteers. You need people to greet and teach Sunday school. And so one thing that has happened, there's some large scale studies of sort of ministry changes during the pandemic, is that volunteering has not come back. People have not come back. Some of that is because there's a couple things. So that's one. So money actually kept going in. Like people were able to still give and support, and sometimes they were able to expand the work they did in their community. So they started food pantries. They gave other kinds of assistance to people. But people stopped volunteering as much. They also, I think, I was talking to a pastor of a very large church about the content problem, basically, and the experience. So in the U.S., this is this move, especially among larger churches, to call Sunday morning worship an experience and to focus on the content of that, right? And sometimes you see larger churches that have basically, and this is not my idea, but I've heard other folks refer to it as a TED Talk and a Coldplay concert. That's what you get. Yeah. Okay, you probably heard this.
We call them the BFCs up here, and I'll let you figure out what those initials stand for. The big churches, but
the big friendly churches.
Yes, you got it. You got it. Bob is on the ball. I'll tell you.
So that's been one of the things that's changed, right? This kind of, and then the second part is the response to the pandemic here in the States was because it wasn't just pandemic. So if I can back up one thing. If we take away one thing from the book, one of the things I want people to take away is that it's not that one thing in America is changing after another. It's that, and this is an adaptation of a quote from a writer named John Scalzi, who writes science fiction books, who's very good. He's got this great book called Old Man's War. If you haven't read it, you should. John's
love this quote you're going to use. I love this. I know what's coming.
So, and he says about old age is not, basically it's not that it's one damn thing after another. And I said, damn, sorry.
Oh, we say worse than that here. I said BFC.
BFC, right? Yeah. It's that everything happens all at the same time. Everything goes wrong.
Right.
That's what's happening in American religion. It's not that one thing has changed after another. It's that everything is changing all the time. So no wonder people are freaked out. And because we have, what are all the changes? We have a worldwide pandemic, which interrupts everything. We have this changing demographic, mostly white to much more diverse over a 40, 50 year period, very fast. We have different ideas about what gender is now. We have moved from being heteronormative to affirming. We have economic uncertainty because not everybody's still recovered from the 2008 recession. We have technological change. If you had told people that if you told me 10 years ago that I'd be sitting here talking to you doing this podcast
balls in Canada,
look on this thing that it was like 2 clicks and I'm doing a video call with people, I would think I was the Jetsons or whatever. Right. That was not.
Well, I've said 1,000 times, like 3 years ago, if I had said to my congregation, let's put in $10,000 worth of video equipment and a high-speed internet in the building to make sure we can live stream our services out to whoever wants to be present digitally, they would have ran me out of town on a donkey.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think what's his name? John Jetson, the dad. His birthday was in August.
George Jetson. Oh,
George Jetson. His birthday was in August. Anyway, please continue. Sorry.
So George, it's all right. We're like the world that I grew up in, and some of you are a little bit older. The world you grew up in isn't the same, right? That the world, and that's a lot of change all at the same time. And I don't like. I was telling someone, do you have Chick-fil-A up there in Canada?
It has.
You know what it is?
I know what it is, and it's affected us. It's shown up in a couple of markets.
Okay. Yeah. So when I was a newspaper reporter at the Tennessean in Nashville, we had a cafeteria, and the cafeteria made the best chicken fingers ever. It was our kind of treat on Friday. Our big treat of the week as journalists was Southern chicken finger Friday, right? Chicken finger Friday, the best. So sometimes we do that here. Now in Chick-fil-A in the South, you could get these chicken tenders, which are just regular. It was like Chick-fil-A sandwich just cut up, and they're very tasty. But they also have a spicy variety. But here in Illinois, where we live, we can only get the spicy ones. And my wife doesn't like the spicy ones. I don't like spicy ones either. And we keep going to the Chick-fil-A and thinking, I'm going to get the real chicken tenders. In fact, there's actually.
That sounds like the Anglican Church.
We've been saved because there's a Texas chain called Cane's Chicken Fingers, which are really good. We can get them, but they're more pricey than Chick-fil-A. But we get mad because we can't get the chicken fingers we want. And that's one change. And it sounds silly, but lots of us don't like change. Just think of all these things happening at the same time. And we don't know who in the US, we don't know who we are anymore. But plus, we haven't talked about racial reconciliation, right? In the middle of this,
George Floyd.
That's what George Floyd, this rethinking of who are we and what was our history and how do we say We like to be who we are, but who we are wasn't great because you are. And in churches, you're really trying to hand off the and other institutions, you're trying to hand off from older, mostly white donors who are mostly conservative, or maybe conservative on all kinds of levels. Conservative to young people.
And on top of that, we're recognizing that we as the church were complicit in a lot of the stuff that we're trying to reconcile now, especially, in Canada,
especially the racial
reconciliation and racial stuff, and the church had a hand in that. So
huge.
that all, with everything you said too, Bob, it's
and so, I mean, I think like Rob and I are in a similar size congregation. Okay. So we're both, what I would say is coming out, I can't say coming out of pandemic because we're still in it, but it's, we're just sort of reconciling our numbers these last few weeks because we've shifted how we do things. We're doing two services now that are sort of split. So we split the big congregation we used to have. But I'm going to say we're at about 80% of where we were pre-2020. Okay. And there's that soft edge, that sort of 20% that it's like there has been a change in habitus, right? Like there's a shift. And as you said, we had a meeting about this the other night, and I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing, Rob, but there were people despairing. And I said, look, you all who are around the table here are very incredible people to keep hammering on about this and being here. But you don't know what's going on at home with all this change, right? Like it's not, yes, there's the habit part of it, right? But other habits have been disrupted too. And so a lot of people feel like they just can't manage one more thing. And they can't put Sunday morning back in the mix. And that's what we're seeing. Rob, I don't know what it looks like at your place, but
it's similar. And there's everybody that's not around, that was around a lot that I've talked to, or some of our wardens have talked to, there's everyone's got a different reason or stories why, and it's based on their individual situation and what they've gone through. Some of it's fear, still being in crowded rooms and that sort of stuff, right? So I'm seeing the same thing.
Now it's funny, when I read this piece of your book and you talked about respectability, or Laura Everett, is it? In Massachusetts, right? My heart leapt, because for years I've been beating the drum that the greatest threat to the church is respectability. As long as you look right, as long as you got the right titles, you wear the right clothes, you say the right things, the church loves you. You can do all that. But if you don't fit the mold, then God help you. And I've been beating that drum for a while. So I was taken by your chapter on the Hamlet problem. Right. And I was thankful to be introduced to Laura Everett, and I've since looked her up and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is somebody I need to follow. And she's of the Massachusetts Council of Churches. Among many great things that you point out that she has said, you highlight that she put it all into perspective by saying the presumption that a good reputation alone is sufficient is no longer going to cut it. And you go on to write, many leaders find themselves in a position of authority with the ability to make decisions that can change the course of institutions at exactly the time when titles no longer matter. And where relationships and influence mean more than authority. And that can be difficult for leaders who spent years working their way to the top of the ladder, only to find that no one really wants to hear what they have to say anymore. And, Rob and I have seen this in colleagues that are that, they got to have their titles, the whole thing. And it's like, I think, well, who gives a shit anymore? Like, they don't give a shit about you doing that. You need to, you need to engender a relationship with these people. So church leaders, like many of us, often think that they're central actors on a stage, you write, and that everything that happens in the plot revolves around the decisions they make. I'll pause here to say, this is the point I was trying to get across to my own people when we're talking about those who are not here right now. Because we all in this panic, what have we done that they're not back? And I said, well, hold on a second. It's not, there's more going on in the church, right? And so you go on to say, it's as if the world is a Shakespearean drama and the church leaders are the main character. As a result, they focus on their own actions, believing that everything else will fall into place if they make the right decision, choose the right strategy, embrace the newest and most exciting trends. People like, you mentioned Packard, Chad Packard, is it, I think?
Oh, Josh Packard,
Josh Packard, pardon me. Josh Packard are saying that churches are not the star of the show. The play is unfolding around them, and to survive and thrive, they need to adapt to changes outside of their control. And I think that's a big deal. I just wonder if you can say more of that, because we often think we have control over more than we actually do.
So this is one of the things. So in the US, for example, I'll give you a little context. The average congregation has dropped from 137 people in the year 2000 to 65. according to the
Mm.
faith community study. It's a
Right.
big study.
Right.
So, and it's because of all these factors. So I have a friend, the small church that was really important in our life is just closed. It's the church we went to earlier in our marriage. Just the folks who prayed to us, our daughter, basically into existence. That church closed post-COVID. A lot of it, some of it is they shrunk, some of it is their building needs some work and they didn't want to spend the money, not knowing if they were going to survive. But part of it is they just couldn't figure out what to do post-COVID.
Right.
But my friend, who's a pastor and a chaplain who goes to the church, was like, I just feel guilty all the time. Because what do we do wrong? Do we do the wrong music? Did we do the wrong? Did our pastor have the wrong methodology? Did we not come back fast enough? And I wanted to say to her, no, it's not your fault. This is your problem that you have this change. It's not your fault. Now, you might have done stuff too. There's probably fault in it. But this was even if you've been perfect, this was coming for you.
Right.
This whole change in the way institutions work and influence and the rethinking of the past, that was coming for you no matter what you did.
Right.
And to help people understand that was the other reason I write the book, say, look, the struggle is not just because if it was just theology or just a better, hipper, faster program, then you could fix it.
Yeah.
It'd be easy, but there's no fix. There's no fixed long-term relationships. It's like it's a little bit like, I don't know, it's a bad analogy. I'm making this up as I go. Like the dating app thing.
This
right?
guy, you could move into our church. All Rob and I ever do is make stuff up as we go.
That's right.
The dating app, right? People are trying to date. You're trying to, what you do is trying to solve a very complex problem. Like I'm in awe of religious leaders these days because the complex social problem you're trying to solve at a time when people are very anxious and there's 15 things coming out at the same time, and you got to keep the lights on, and you have a larger institution, you have centuries of history, and you have boundaries based on the institution that are not very flexible, that were built for several centuries ago, different kinds of times where people can move faster. And I mean, if you look at, say, the Methodist Church in the United States, they're splintering. They are going to have a schism. They can't have a schism because they can't have an orderly schism. They had negotiated an orderly schism, which is better than a disorderly schism, but they can't because they haven't met for 3 years. And then people in the 3 years, they've just gotten angry at each other.
Yeah.
So this is I wanted people to know, like, this is not your fault. It really isn't. You could do things wrong and you have to admit your faults and your problems.
Right.
And it's not the fault of the people outside. That's the other part you get. It's those other people, those secularists, those the whatever other faith group is. You listen, they don't believe. If they have harmed us.
Right.
Everything becomes very bifurcated, right? It's
bifurcated.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, as a pastor that has these conversations, the thing that breaks my heart the most is when I hear my parishioners who have children and grandchildren blame themselves because the children and grandchildren aren't there anymore. Like, what did I do wrong? Because my kids would come when they were little, and now they have nothing to do with it. So they're carrying that as well. But
and go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that but the great part about this is you have all these tools that you need to deal with broken relationships, to deal with listening to difference, to deal with different changes. What's the whole story of the Bible, but people dealing with change? Like, imagine if I was thinking this, maybe I'm making this up again. Right? I started, I haven't done this in a long time. So I started one of these read the Bible in a year store.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, I'm already 10 days behind, but I'm trying to catch up. But, I'm thinking of, like, first of all, these people are a train wreck. And they're they're trying to, but the first thing to say, Abraham, right? Move from where you were, where you're old and your family, to this new place.
Yeah.
And these people don't like them. Like all this stuff that they did to trying to figure out I'm like, oh, maybe they're just trying to get along in a foreign country where they don't understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they adapt, right? They adapt to this and they keep adapting. They keep messing up. And they say, we're sorry when you mess up, right? This is all, so all the skills are there. They had the Babylonian captivity, right? They're all gone. Oh, sorry, you can't be in your country anymore. They don't just give up. They say, okay, how do we build something new?
Yeah.
But that's hard, and it's short, it's long and it's hard, and it's a lot of work, and there's great kind of joy and community in it, but it's not simple.
Right.
It's messy.
It's messy.
Well, let's touch on what's new and what's coming, and because in the third part of the book you talk about what's next, and I really resonated with the story you told about the two different congregations in Seattle. There was Interbay Covenant Church,
Yeah.
led by a pastor named Ray Bartel, and then there was a congregation that they were a congregation that were around for like 60 years, right? And then there's this Quest Church, which is kind of like a new startup congregation. It's adjacent to the Interbay Church. And what struck me was the vision of this pastor named Ray around his conviction that his congregation had to change or die out. And that's what he brought to them. And this is a quote from your book. You write, Bartley was honest with his congregation that the future would bring change, either by the church closing or by having Interbay's ministry move in a completely new direction. Doing the same thing they had done in the past was not going to be an option. And Bartel had been thinking about an idea known as kingdom mindedness, thinking about the big picture rather than just the needs of that congregation. And he had come to believe that many congregations had died on the vine because they had a parochial mindset, worried about their own, worrying about their own survival. Parochial mindset, worried about their own survival rather than thinking what might be possible outside of that. And he urged his congregation to look at what was best for the flourishing kingdom of God in his community. And what struck me about that was because those are the conversations we're having, like today. Now I'm having one later this afternoon. And because it's been a challenge, I say, to get folks to kind of shift that insular lens into a wider lens. Can you say more about what you learned about, this need of congregations to move forward by expanding their lenses? Because it's important.
Yeah, this is there's actually a number of stories about that. The one in Quest is really interesting because it is the Interbay is right down the street from Mars Hill Church, which Mars Hill, you probably know Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll's story. Massive church. They're both kind of dying at the same time. They just don't know it. Right. Mars Hill is going to implode, but this church is really interesting. And Pastor Ray, so I'd known this story for a while. I had never talked to Pastor Ray though, and talking to him, I got a whole new thing of this because he's a really interesting guy. So Pastor Ray is kind of a Boeing engineer, go-getter, doing real well, has this kind of conversion experience early in his marriage that kind of changes the course of his life because he said he'd been a real hard driver, not the nicest person to be around. They go to this charismatic renewal, changes the course of their life. He decides he might go to seminary, kind of gets discouraged that no, you're not the right type for seminary. You're kind of you'd been a businessman. You're not spiritual enough, or maybe you're too conservative for our church. There's no space for you. So he eventually lands in this little church where the pastor's like, oh, we can use people like you, right? There's a place for you here to use the gifts that you have. So he gets nurtured in this. And then his pastor mentor passes away, and the pastor says, right before he dies, basically visits him, and he's like, you need to go to seminary, finish your education, become a pastor. So he does that. He becomes a pastor, small church pastor, goes real well, but then he quits his job finally at Boeing and is able to be a pastor full time. This is his first church. So imagine you spend your whole life, second career, you leave everything to become pastor's church. The church has got some troubles. You get him through there, and you're healthy, and you can start thinking about the long term. And this other church rents space from you, and they had a warehouse. They turned into a coffee house. They rent space, and he gets to know the pastor there, and he's like, "Oh, they're really going. There's something there." And they realized they lived in a place that was a little more expensive, so they'd have college kids come to their church, stay during college, and then leave. And when they had kids, because they couldn't buy a house, and the area was changing, they think that church has something that we don't have. And they become friends. So he brings it up to the other pastor. What do you think about us merging? And really what merging meant is we die and get absorbed and affiliate with you. Yeah. Not that you come join us, we joined you. And
this is Eugene Cho, right?
This is Eugene Cho, yeah. So he and Eugene get to know each other. But the thing is this, he's not going to do it unless the whole congregation buys it.
Right.
Like he's like, hey, we're thinking about this. What do you all think? They get close, they have a vote. And, they don't get it the first vote. It's like 85%, but 15% say no. Then they're like, it's some, I don't, not 85, it's in the 85, 90%. But
Mhm.
enough people hold out. They say, no, we can't do this
Mhm.
because unless we're all together, it's going to lose people, and we're too
Mhm.
small to do that. So then they decide to merge. They do this. They realize it's like this parable or the saying of Jesus that unless you fall, the seed falls into the earth and dies. If I'm messing it up because I'm not a preacher, I'm terrible. But it's like say, if a seed falls in the earth and dies, it'll bear much fruit, right?
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he's like, hey, you got to die to live. Okay, which is a very Christian message. They do this, then they end up buying Mars Hill's church when it implodes. But then they are starting new churches. There's a new church in Los Angeles called the Church We Hope For, which is a multi-ethnic church. It actually started during COVID, so they're having a hard time. But they're still doing pretty well, which is,
Right.
but they're funded by, again, it's passing on from one generation to another.
Right,
And this
right.
is really interesting little church in Sacramento called the Table United Methodist Church. Old historic United Methodist Church, kind of aging, dying. To get a couple new pastors there, they basically start a new congregation while they're running the old church, and nurture people. And then they have a little bit different music, but they really dive into the method of Methodism, which means getting people to be in deep relationships, meeting together every week, talking about developing their faith. And they're more progressive, but they have a real intentionality in their spiritual development. And now they kind of rebuilt the church.
Right.
They have a thriving, now COVID has hurt them like anyone else, but they're thinking about starting another church around a community garden. So there is like possibilities here.
Mhm.
I think one of the things is that, like, if you can not hang on long enough, you can stay long enough and not think, oh, we should close our doors now because we're having a bad year.
Right.
Maybe you'll have 2 or 3 bad years.
Right.
Maybe just being faithful and staying open till the people who need to show up there show up.
Mhm.
So
Well, what I would say to affirm what you're saying, Bob, particularly as it relates to, like Rob said about his own congregation. I've been in London for 10 years. Rob's been around for about 5 of those, I guess. But before he came there, the leadership had sort of gotten to a place where they're ready to turn the lights out.
Right.
Yeah.
And when Rob came along, they started to have that broader conversation. Now some really rich conversations are taking place because they did hang on,
Right.
and let's do the right thing. Let's just not just throw our hands up in despair. Let's begin to really discern where the Spirit's blowing in this, right?
Yeah.
how's it
definitely.
going? I want to know how's it going 5 years in.
Well, 5 years in, it's like Kevin said, when I got there, they were pretty much ready to hang it up. And now we're having discussions about a reinvention of a new community that actually surrounds the church.
Mhm.
So it's not, again, it's what resonated with me about this is that we're talking about not just taking care of our church, but meeting needs
The neighborhood.
of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That can come into the periphery of the church and be part of it. Right. So it's not just about us, it's about what everybody else needs.
Mhm.
And that's what's generated the new life is
Yeah.
this idea that now we're doing something for, quite frankly, most of us won't even be here because a lot of them are older.
Yeah.
But we're doing something to do exactly what the people that came before us did, was to create something for down the road
Mhm.
that's going to serve. And that's what's given them new life. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
serve
it's pretty
Rob
cool.
in that neighborhood where there's a lot of diversity and change.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, there's
Where you
been a
are,
lot of
right? Like-
immigration, and there's very low income housing down the street and struggles around
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
people experiencing homelessness and such. So what does a community based on those needs look like around the church?
Mhm.
Right. So so we're having those conversations, which is good. Go ahead, Ian. Do you want
And
to
last,
wrap it up?
well, yeah, before we wrap it up,
We want to give Ian the hammer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good.
I get the big last question.
He gets the last stone in the curling. It's the 10-10.
You write about you write about a real truth about religion in this quote that I'm going to read, and then I have a question on the other
Okay.
side of it. You write, "Religion leads to both hate and healing. It tears us apart and binds us together. It stokes our fears and gives them the courage to overcome them. It teaches us to see those around us as both neighbors and enemies, friends and foes." Now, listening to the stories you've talked about and reflecting on the influence of religion that you've witnessed and that helped you create this book, what is one thing you've come away with that you'd want your readers to understand about where we are today in the religious landscape?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to say a couple things. One, I want to say that what people do right now really matters. That they think there is, because all the incentives are on the faux side, at least in the US, right? All the incentives are
even more
negative.
so here, I have to tell
Yeah.
you, Bob, because you guys still have a collective there. Like we've long gone down below the critical mass.
Yeah. So but the whole country is like, every incentive on every group is to not like other people and to really not, and really to think about yourselves. There's no incentives to think about bigger pictures. Who do we want to be together? And so that's one place. I think okay, I'm gonna steal the Star Trek quote. I'm gonna use my Star Trek quote.
Yeah.
My favorite one from the book, that only a fool fights in a burning house. It's from this Star Trek episode called The Day of the Dove, in which the Enterprise comes across this Klingon vessel that's in trouble, and then the Klingons like try to take over the ship, and they end up fighting with swords. It's great. It's like Star Wars before Star Wars, and no one is asking like, why do we get swords? Because an alien apparently has taken over the ship and is forcing them to fight each other for its pleasure, because that's how it feeds its pleasure, by watching conflict. So they throw down their weapons, and this Klingon general says, only a fool fights in a burning house. That's one of the things. Like, if all we do is fight and try to figure out who's going to win, will there be anything left?
Right.
And also, then you might miss something. Okay, so do you all know who Mike Yaconelli is?
Oh, yeah, God rest, he's dead now. Yeah.
So right before he died, I talked to him. I did an interview him like a month before he died.
Yeah.
And about his book, Messy Spirituality.
I was just going to say Messy Church, Messy Spirituality.
Messy Spirituality. But he said this really great thing. I just pulled it up. He's talking about secular culture and its effect on churches. So he says this. I should have put it in the book. I didn't think about it. There's almost so many things I couldn't put in the book. But he said
second edition. Bob, don't worry.
He said our secular pagan culture doesn't make us drunk. It makes us dull. It robs us of our creativity. We don't sit around thinking, how can I redeem the situation? We've lost the power of the tiny, the small, the little thoughtful things we can do for each other that make all the difference in the world. It's not that we run around doing these horrible sins. It's that we don't run around doing these little acts of grace that we ought to be doing. I'm like, I should have put that in the book, because that's what it is, right? You could choose to, what's the world you want to make? Who do you want to be?
Yeah,
right.
And what, and maybe I'll close with my other favorite story. I have a million favorite stories, but the story of All Saints Church is still one of my favorite stories.
Yes.
Because there are miracles. So you guys are in the miracle business, right? This happens all the time. You have great things happen and nobody knows about it because they're just normal for you.
Right.
So this little church called All Saints, I go and interview the rector of the biggest Episcopal church in Nashville, downtown cathedral. He's great, very nice man. He's still there. And just do one of these kind of new rector in town. What does he think about, So we do this interview. And at the end, he's like, yeah, I got to go see the bishop. This church that was saved by refugees, we're giving them some money. And I'm like, what? Why didn't you tell me at the beginning? Why has no one called me to tell me? Because
you buried the lead.
Yeah, buried the lead, right? 10 or 15 years ago in Nashville, when I was there, it's just probably, the late 2000s, it was very anti-immigrant, very anti-refugee. We'd had a lot of immigration and refugees coming in, and there'd been a backlash against it. There was a lot of conflict. And it was the middle of the Episcopal Church wars in the U.S., where the conservatives and liberals were at each other before they kind of schismed here in the U.S. You probably have no conflict up in Canada.
No, everything's really nice. Self-righteous.
So this little church called All Saints. The story is basically, it's a new congregation, brand new building, going great guns. The pastor gets mad at the new presiding bishop. He decides he's quitting and taking all his people with him, starting another new church right down the street. Down the street.
Beautiful.
Right? So this congregation of 12 people now is left with a building they can't afford.
Right.
And lost all their friends. And no hope that they're going to have anything. New pastor comes in. He's like, we're going to close it down. We're going to sell the building. I'm going to walk you through that process. Then these refugees show up. The refugees show up and say, from Myanmar, and say, we need a place to worship. They're all Anglicans. And the pastor's like, no, wait, we're going to close down. And I
No,
don't want to
we're closing,
disappoint you. I don't want to disappoint you by saying, come here, we're going to close, right?
Yeah.
So they decide, they together save the church. And the diocese
That's
sends them stuff.
amazing.
And then I went back like 10 years after I first reported on it because they were making a movie about it. They've actually made a faith-based movie.
Oh,
It's-
yeah,
it's
I saw
good.
that.
It's called, it's good, right? But the thing is, like, they're still going, and I feel bad for the people who left because they missed this.
Right.
And the church could have missed what
Yeah.
they had. They
Right.
could have missed the last 10 years. And even this congregation I was telling you about that closed recently, they were going to close 30 years ago and had 30 years of ministry before they finally they had a new life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like all kinds of things could happen
Oh, yeah.
to you if you are wait and see.
Yeah.
And don't give up and think that, okay.
yeah.
And maybe it won't work, and maybe you'll maybe you'll sell your building,
Right.
and someone else will carry this on.
Amazing what you'll see when you stop staring at your belly button.
Yeah, but there's a Chesterton quote which I like, and now quoting old English people, that basically how much bigger your world gets, the smaller you are.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And
That's
so
wonderful,
I think
yeah.
this is I'm very hopeful about what could be, because I think maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I think people might get tired of just being angry all the time.
I hope you're right, man.
Mhm.
And if
Yeah.
some of them do,
Yeah.
they might come back, right? They'll come back and they'll come and say,
Yeah.
okay, I need something. I have talked about the church as like a gas station on a country road, which you don't need until you need it. And then
That's right.
you're like,
Yeah.
oh, but if it's not there, I think of all the people who show up and go, I'm at a crisis point in my life, and there's nobody there for
Right.
them, right? They come to your church and they think, or they come to your church, even worse, they come at a crisis point and the people say, we don't want you.
No.
Yeah, we're ready to
You're
close.
not- we're ready
Yeah,
to
we're
close. Or
closing,
not ready to
sorry.
close,
Yeah.
or we're open, but you're the wrong kind of person.
You're the wrong
Right.
people.
Right.
You're the wrong people.
You're not my guy.
You're not my kind of people, as Seinfeld would
I
say.
suppose the other thing I would say is that all these arguments that people have about all kinds of things and
yeah.
identity and theology,
Yeah.
they all matter. But churches are not at a place where turning people away is a good option.
Mhm.
Getting rid of the people you have is a
Yeah.
bad option because you'll never replace them.
Right.
You have many of them have generations of investment in the church, and
Mhm.
once they're gone forever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so getting rid of the people you have is not a great idea. Sometimes
Yeah.
people self-select out, but also saying that the people who want to come in that you don't want them there
Right.
is a problem. Now there are boundaries and identities and
Sure.
healthy patterns. That's all part of it. But the kind of starting point of like you're because people know if you don't want them. They're
Mhm.
like, we know that you want us.
Well, Bob, yeah, that last thing you said there about the gas station thing, I pulled that quote out of your book and I shared it with our parish council last
Yeah.
night. I said, I just want you guys to know this work matters because somebody is going to stop. So the people out there looking for hope and the work you're doing now, I
Yeah.
know it's exhausting, but it matters. And we're grateful for you for writing that stuff.
Yeah. No,
Thank
it's
you.
so great. Thank you for having me on. It's so much fun to talk about this stuff.
Great. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Great,
And if
Bob.
you want to
Thank
come, so maybe invite me to come to Canada. I'll come.
Come to
visit you.
Canada.
We would love to have you in Canada, definitely. And,
Amen.
Want
Yes.
to also remind our listeners of the title of the book, because we want you to get out there and get it. Reorganized Religion, the Reshaping of the American Church, Why It Matters, and it does. And thanks for the hope today, and thanks for the time, Bob. We appreciate
Oh, it's great
it.
to talk to you. All right. Have a
And,
great.
and if you guys if you're listening to this, go to our webpage, thevicarscrossing.com, and look for books. And on there'll be a direct link where you can buy this sucker. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Great to talk
Bob.
to you. Okay.
Thank you
take
so
care.
much.
Bye
Thanks,
for
man.
now.
Take care.
Bye.
And once again, our deep thanks to Bob for spending the time with us today. The book is Reorganized Religion, the Reshaping of the American Church, Why It Matters, and a great conversation and lots for people in our parishes and churches to get their teeth into. So appreciate Bob's time with that.
Yeah, great guy, great book. Can't encourage you enough to get it, especially those of you who are in leadership in the
Mhm.
church, because Bob makes the case that, we have an important role. So let's get on it.
Yeah, very much so. Hey, thanks to our sponsors again today at the Vicar's Crossing, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated, to the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve, and to Molly Maid. Remember to make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. That's a wrap, guys, for episode 3 in season 7 of the Vickers Crossing. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
Season 7. It's like we're old vets at this now. I'm Kevin George at St. Aidan's Church in London West.
And my name is Ian. Thank you all for listening.
And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways
Before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!